Last week was the 42nd anniversary of Roe versus Wade. It was the Supreme Court decision to legalize abortion in our country. As I listened over the radio and through the TV, the various messages on abortion that I heard focused on the horrors of abortion. They focused on the child. They focused on the procedure. They focused on the law. They focused on the new pro-life legislation. And they focused on Planned Parenthood. Very little was said about the wounded women scarred by abortion and the hope and healing Jesus can bring. Today, Katherine and I are here to represent these women as we share our stories and our heart with each one of you. It is now my privilege to introduce Katherine Richardson.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to start today by thanking the women of Council for Life, the women and men of Council for Life, for your courageous leadership in educating people in our community on women in a crisis pregnancy. This is such an issue that needs to be addressed, and it's truly inspiring what you do each day. I want to also thank my friends and family for being here in attendance. Without each of you, I would not be standing here today, and my journey would look very different. My story is not an extraordinary one. It's not rare. It's actually increasingly common. And it's something that I very much consider to be a heart issue. Each year in the U.S., 1 in 3 pregnancies end in abortion. And as a result of this decision, roughly 80% of the women who have chosen this decision are suffering from severe negative emotional trauma. But abortion isn't something that people really talk about outside of the political realm. It's on TV and it's on the internet, but it's rarely spoken about in the church or in the school or in the homes. When it is being discussed, no one is talking about the personal emotional damage that men and women endure as a result or the healing that is available to them. When I was 21 years old, the summer before my senior year of college, I had the tremendous opportunity to study overseas in Italy. Everything in my life was seemingly good. I was enjoying school, I had wonderful friends and family, I was dating a young man, and I was having the time of my life. But while I was abroad, I realized that something wasn't quite right. I realized that my body was telling me something was off. And it occurred to me that I could, in fact, be pregnant. Upon arriving back in the U.S. and in complete denial, I went to the clinic on my college campus. And there it was confirmed, 5 weeks pregnant. I wasn't listening to the nurse's words as she told me that. I was staring at the piece of paper in front of me, reading the results, and saying to myself, this can't be happening. I cannot be having a baby. Before leaving the clinic that day, I had arranged to drive to a nearby city to have the abortion, to go through with the procedure. The idea of an unintended child, the fear in that moment is unlike anything I can explain. It's completely paralyzing. I didn't allow myself even a moment to process it or to talk to family or to friends. The decision was made. I was having an abortion. And the vast majority of abortions are decided upon within the first 24 hours of a woman confirming that she is pregnant. Early the next morning, my boyfriend drove me to my appointment. And for those of you who have never been inside of an abortion clinic, I want to paint a picture for you of what I experienced. And I apologize, this might be difficult to hear. There were no protesters on the morning that I arrived, only an ugly windowless building. And upon entering, I was checked in by a woman who told me that I would have to wait to be examined and that cash was the only form of payment that was accepted. I was examined by a doctor who quickly rushed me through the process and didn't bother being gentle or personal. I don't once remember him even looking me in the eyes. No one asked me if I was okay, and the word baby was never used. After more time passed, I was taken into a white room wearing a white robe and asked to lie down on a table. And for anyone, this would be frightening. But at 21 years old, when your family doesn't know where you are and you're not altogether certain of what's about to happen, it's a living nightmare. My arms were restrained down to my sides and an IV was entered. And that's when I heard the loud sound of the vacuum. The last thing I can remember before falling asleep was staring at the ceiling, crying, and asking God not to let me die. Even in that moment, my mind was on me and not on my unborn child. There are several types of abortion, but the two that are most commonly used are the manual vacuum aspiration and the chemical abortion. I had an invasive vacuum procedure, and the chemical abortion, or abortion pill, was not legalized in the state that I was in at the time. As terrifying as it may sound to have an invasive procedure, what's more terrifying to me is the idea of being able to take just 2 pills to terminate a pregnancy. Not to minimize the effects of this, as they make a woman violently ill for days. But I think if I had had the option in my 21-year-old shoes, I quickly would have chosen to take the pills. The rest of that day is a complete blur, and for the next few days, I was in blinding pain from the procedure. But once the pain was gone, so was the memory of it. I locked the door on that secret and unknowingly slipped into a black hole. For the next 5 years, it would be something that I didn't speak of, I didn't think of, and honestly suppressed so deep down inside of me that I wasn't altogether certain it wasn't just a bad dream. 5 years of hiding in shame from my family and friends who loved me. 5 years of pretending I wasn't the kind of girl that would go through with such a horrible act. 5 years of silently suffering. The power of a secret can be insurmountable. Satan's lies and subtle deceptions resulted in me creating distance with those that I loved, and I lost myself and my self-worth during that time. In 2011, a friend invited me to come to church with her. It was a young adult singles ministry that on any given night has roughly 2,000 men and women in attendance. It was that night that a young woman stood up on stage and told her story of abortion. I was completely shocked. No one talks about abortion in church, let alone admits to having one in front of all of her peers. When I left that night, I was reeling at what she'd done. Won't people judge her? Doesn't she care that people will know her secret? As weeks passed, I couldn't stop thinking about her story and how it was actually very similar to mine. She wasn't some awful creature who had committed some unforgivable sin. She was a young woman who had made a mistake, just like me. I also kept thinking about the class that she had spoken of, Someone Cares, a post-abortive restoration ministry, a class that's sole purpose was to see women fully restored to fellowship with God and help them to understand the importance of accepting and walking in forgiveness, to free them from their burden of guilt and shame and bitterness about what they had done and help anchor them in hope. I couldn't have known it then, but I was about to embark on a beautiful journey of restoration. God's love story was unfolding right before me. I attended the class in the fall of 2011, and upon arriving on my first night, I noticed that, again, these weren't awful, terrible women. There was a woman that reminded me of my own mom. There was a young girl who was the same age as me when I had my abortion, and a woman that has since become my dearest friend and sister in Christ, a true light in my life. Over the next 10 weeks of fellowship, these women became my family and my refuge. I quickly learned that it takes bravery to be vulnerable with your life and your story, but I believe that God is glorified when we do so. I uncovered years of hurt and a lot of anger towards the parties involved, anger towards God for dealing me that hand, but mostly anger towards myself. I knew better and I was raised better. How could I have been so utterly selfish? But I began to make the shift from condemnation to healing, and I started to understand the broader picture of healing. After 10 weeks had passed, the change that had taken place inside of me was nothing short of miraculous. It was a heart change. I had opened a wound that had long been sealed and allowed the Lord to clean it out. There was no ugly scar to speak of. He made the broken me whole and my story something of beauty. So I started by telling my family about my journey, and the hardest thing I've ever had to do was tell my sweet parents what I had gone through. But their grace and forgiveness was just another example of God's abounding mercy. They actually felt like they had let me down, which was so crazy because I had been feeling for years that that's what I'd done to them. But the closeness that came from stepping out of that hiding and shame is truly only something that God can bring about. We began operating in unity, and finally, they too were allowed the opportunity to mourn this loss and come to a place of acceptance. I joined a small group and decided to be a prayer partner for women who were walking through the class. Each week, I would write a letter to a woman and encourage her with her walk. It was during that time that I was wrestling with what to do with my own story and how I could give dignity and purpose to my child. And with that, I decided to become a facilitator for Someone Cares. I've been filled with the desire to show the hurting and broken that they are not alone. And for the last 2.5 years, facilitating alongside that same sweet friend that led my class, I've made this ministry a huge part of my life. There is no greater joy for me than being able to witness women walk out of shame and darkness and into truth and light. I believe he's using me and my family for his purpose, and he has placed me in a situation that cultivates compassion and humility. Others have been in similar situations and made the right decisions where I did not. But nothing can separate us from God's love. There is beauty to be found in stories even like mine. And through it all, my battleground verse, Lily says battleground verses, that I've clung to has been Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Abortion is real and it is massive. It does not discriminate. And I know firsthand that if you allow it, it will destroy everything in its wake. It is my prayer that in hearing my story, we can really start to get to the heart of the matter. Thank you.